everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to do a if you liked these books, you may like this book video. So I just recently finished George and Rue by George Elliott Clarke. George Elliott Clarke is a Canadian author. He was born in Nova Scotia and I believe he now resides in Toronto. He is a very well-known poet and a professor. One of the things I wanted to say about this book is that I didn't know anything about it until I started researching books that were set in New Brunswick, a province in Canada, if you're not familiar with it. And I found that to be a real shame, and that's why one of the reasons that I wanted to feature it in today's video is because these are the types of books that are super important to be amplified in the Canadian canon, because they are telling important stories that are not known well enough amongst general Canadians. So I think hopefully most Canadians are aware that a lot of former slaves, whether they were fleeing slavery to come into Canada or whether slavery had been abolished in the US and they were moving to Canada looking for a chance to establish themselves, get some land, and have a free life, happened in Nova Scotia over various different time periods. I think different levels of migrations happened. And this book chronicles that for people too. So while it is an individual story of two brothers, the Hamilton brothers, who were in a true crime situation, they committed a crime and they paid the ultimate price for it. And their history, their ancestry is explained in this story, along with the circumstances, the systemic racist circumstances that led to them turning to a life of crime and ultimately paying the price for their crime. I thought that the way that George Elliott Rue wrote this story was very poetic. He has some beautiful language that he incorporates into it while also using a certain vernacular, and that made me think a lot of The Color Purple by Alice Walker. So if you like The Color Purple, the kind of rural Black experience of a certain era, I think you would really like this one because it's very similar in that tone. This, however, being, of course, a more feminist-based text, and this being a story of men. So it's not got the same exact feeling in that way. But what it does share is a very specific experience of a time and place for Black people and the diaspora of North America. And this book also has that. There is a lot of violence in this book, also violence in this book, domestic abuse. There is still a mother figure in this story, and you can see her desires and her wants and what she's looking for in life. And you can, feel bad for her. You can think, there's a lot of room in here to form your opinions about people, but to also see their side and have empathy. And I feel like The Color Purple does that really well as well. So if you like The Color Purple, I think you will like George and Rue. The other aspect of George and Rue that you have is a true crime story. So I would say that the beginning of the book is more similar to The Color Purple. It's talking about the circumstances socially, economically, that are leading to the life that these brothers are brought into, and then their childhoods and their coming of age. They don't make it to a very high age, so they do a lot of living in a very short amount of time. You also, of course, learn about their parents and their parents' circumstances, which led to the way that George and Rue were raised. So that's really the first part of the book. And then you get into them as adults, trying to navigate this world, trying to find a way to be free and to live and to make money and to exist as human beings, and the struggle that that entails for them is huge. And it's obviously mostly due to systemic racism. And so they pay the ultimate sacrifice for that when they turn to crime to try to get ahead. And so as it approaches the second part of the book, you're getting more into the crime, and then you're getting into it near the end of the book, the trial, the subsequent trial that comes about. And so George Eliot Clarke was able to pull from records and actual photographs and actual transcripts from the trial to build this last part. So in that sense, I found it had a very similar feeling to Alias Grace. Now, I feel like Margaret Atwood in this book had less probably historical documentation because it was a different time period, but she did have some, and she did take that true crime and the rumors around that crime and, you know, all the mysterious parts and make Alias Grace out of it. This is a little bit less mysterious. We know that they committed the crime. And I think that George Eliot Clarke did take license. He did add in things. He did, you know, create motivations that may not have been there, similarly to Alias Grace. So you're kind of immersed in something that you know actually happened, but you don't know if the details that George Eliot Clarke creates in this story are the actual details. You only know that he's done his research and he's built a story around that. And I would say that Alias Grace is very similar, although there's very much a mysterious edge to this book, I think, that stays throughout the whole story. And there's certainly less mystery in this book. This book is more about talking about the problem, addressing it, showing you the results. So it's not that mysterious at all, whereas Alias Grace has more mystery. But in terms of how they address a historical crime and how they bring that crime into a novelization, I think these books are quite similar. So I do hope that you will check out George and Rue. I think it's worth the read, especially if you're Canadian and you're trying to learn more about Canadian history from a broad perspective, not just from a narrow lens of white colonialism, but also from, you know, a different lens. And this lens is an important one in the history of our country. There is some interesting ways that our Canadian, what would I call that quality we have? Canadians have a tendency to compare our racial relations in our country to the US. So because our racism is less overt, we hold ourselves in a higher regard, and that is addressed in the trial period of this book. And it is a completely arrogant and false way of looking at things, to try to assume that you're better than another country because you don't have something so overt when you are obviously still oppressing an entire group of people is, you know, deplorable and should not be the way that anyone measures equality and justice, but that is also addressed in this book. So I feel like George Eliot Clarke really has his finger on the pulse of the way that Canadian history is unique in its treatment of racialized identities and racialized communities. And again, I would highly, highly recommend it. It's also got some really compelling characters. George is he just wants to like have enough food in his belly and have some pleasure in life, and Rue is very much a man around prestige and wanting to be like Duke Ellington, but just not having the luck, the circumstances, or the education in order to do that. You really get an interesting picture of Nova Scotia, because a lot of this book does take place in Nova Scotia, where they were born, and New Brunswick, because they end up moving to Fredericton, and then you get more of the New Brunswick landscape worked into the story later on. So check out George and Rue if you like Alias Grace and or The Color Purple by Alice Walker. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thanks so much for watching.